So our next speaker is Andy Rehn. Andy works at the Department of Fish and Wildlife. He's a PhD entomologist and the lead bug guy for the statewide program, Perennial Streams Analysis and Assessment, sorry. And then he also is in charge of the Reference Condition Project, which is a very large and important project. And he's going to talk about that. So thank you for coming to speak, Andy.
Really powerful music. Thank you, Greg, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. So I have to confess that despite my title, I'm not actually going to talk about fish and algae this afternoon. It sounded good a month ago. Instead, I'm going to focus on benthic macroinvertebrates, also known as BMIs or bugs, in wadable streams and rivers. And the reason is that indicators based on benthic macroinvertebrates have been more thoroughly developed statewide than for other taxonomic groups like algae or fish. And that's especially true in wadable streams and rivers. That's not to say that no progress has been made with other indicators. In fact, Betty Fetcher in just a few minutes is going to tell us all about algae as an indicator. But I have a fairly limited amount of time to describe a program that's been growing and maturing for more than 20 years now. Plus, I'm an entomologist, so I'm biased. And I have a particular interest in streams. In the second part of my talk, I'll describe how we use multiple indicators together to produce more comprehensive and robust assessments of stream condition than provided by any single indicator alone. Okay, why bioassessment? Or sorry, what is bioassessment? Simply put, it's an evaluation of the condition or health of a water body based on the organisms living within it. We survey water bodies for the different types and numbers of organisms found living there, and we compare those results to established benchmarks of biological health. Traditional stream monitoring tended to focus on single chemical attributes measured at a single point in time, but living organisms are exposed to multiple stressors over longer time frames. So not just multiple chemical constituents, but other types of stressor too, like physical habitat alteration, flow alteration. And so their collective response gives us a more integrated perspective on overall stream condition. We started with benthic macroinvertebrates because they're diverse and abundant at a healthy site. You can have dozens to more than 100 different BMI species. They have unique preferences for different microhabitats, not just in terms of physical setting, but they also have different sensitivities to pollutants, to sedimentation, and to flow alteration. And they're also pretty well known taxonomically. So keys exist to identify benthic macroinvertebrates. So why bioassessment? Streams and rivers provide many benefits to humans. They give us clean drinking water. They provide us places to fish, places to swim. They support diverse and endlessly fascinating native wildlife, from the tiniest riffle beetle to the 10-pound steelhead that just spent 3 years in the ocean but has come home to spawn. In recognition of and in order to protect those ecological services, the Congress in 1972 passed the Clean Water Act, whose objective is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. In order to restore and maintain that biological integrity, we have to be able to measure it. So I'll focus the rest of this overview on 3 key components of how we actually measure and assess biological integrity: standard field and lab methods, reference condition monitoring program. Reference conditions are what we use to set benchmarks or expectations, and they are the core of building any interpretive index for bioassessment data. And the Perennial Streams Assessment, which is our statewide survey that allows biological condition estimates for all wadable stream length in California. In the field, every bioassessment site is sampled for biological, chemical, and physical indicators. The biological indicators are BMIs, diatoms, and soft algae. There are a number of chemical indicators, including nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, total suspended solids, and many others. Physical habitat indicators include riparian vegetation complexity, in-stream habitat complexity, local riparian disturbance. We also do CRAM, the California Rapid Assessment Method, which is a separate protocol aimed at quantifying the quality of the habitat in the riparian zone. All of these indicators are sampled from a standardized reach divided into equally spaced transects, and that systematic protocol ensures that every site is sampled with consistent and equal effort so that we can compare data from streams all around the state. In the lab, we have standard methods for washing and prepping samples for identification. We have methods for subsampling the original total sample into the portion that will actually be identified. We have recommended levels of taxonomic identification, what we call standard taxonomic effort. So which taxa do you identify to species? Which ones do you leave at genus? We have suggested literature that's best suited for identification of different taxonomic groups. And again, the goal of all these standard methods is to ensure good data comparability among all the different stream types in California. All of these methods are well documented in numerous standard operating procedures. They're well supported by extensive quality control measures. For example, we do external quality control of BMI samples where a certain portion of samples from every project are sent to an independent taxonomist for re-identification. We do field audits and calibrations for field crews. So the field crews get together and make sure that they're all on the same page in terms of doing the field protocols consistently. And the methods are well supported by online resources. We have video modules that demonstrate field protocols. We have photographic libraries to help with taxonomic identifications of BMIs and algae. And that's just to name a couple of our online support resources. Okay, the second key element of measuring and assessing ecological condition or biological integrity is the reference condition monitoring program. Reference sites are healthy stream reaches that define a benchmark of expected biological, chemical, and physical conditions when human disturbance in the environment is absent or minimal. That benchmark, known as the reference condition, is the foundation of any bioassessment program. It sets the standard for evaluating results from compliance and ambient monitoring. It provides meaningful objectives for stream restoration. It establishes a framework for protecting our healthiest streams, and it provides a basis for assessing the potential effects of climate change on streams. Over the last 15 years or so, thousands of sites have been sampled by various regional, state, and federal programs. Screened more than 2,000 of those pre-existing sites to see if they qualified as reference. We mostly used remote sensing data to see if sites pass as reference. So remote sensing data quantifies land use in the upstream watershed. So for example, to qualify as reference, a site had to have less than 3% urbanization in the upstream watershed, less than 2 kilometers of road length per kilometer squared in the upstream watershed. It couldn't have any active mines within 5 kilometers upstream. It had to have little or no human activity in the riparian zone as measured by the field crew when they were on site. And that's just a handful of example screens. There are many others measured at multiple spatial scales, not just at the watershed scale. In addition to screening those pre-existing sites, we also targeted high-quality sites not only to improve our geographic coverage, to fill geographic gaps, but also to ensure that we had represented the diversity of stream types and environmental settings throughout California. The result was that the final reference pool had well over 600 sites that did a pretty good job of representing the state's diverse physiography. reference sites to build the California Stream Condition Index, or the CSCI. The CSCI is a biological scoring tool that translates complex data about the BMIs found living at a site into a measure of overall stream condition. The CSCI measures whether and to what extent a stream has been altered from its natural state. And the reason it was important for that reference pool to capture the variability of stream types across California is because streams vary naturally in terms of what BMIs are found living there. So we don't want to confuse that natural variability with human-caused disturbance. So we use a set of natural environmental variables, things like elevation, climate, geology, stream size, and we use statistical modeling to predict what species and what ecological attributes we should find at a site if it's in healthy condition. So we go to a site, we sampled it, we identify the organisms in the lab, and we compare the organisms we observe and the ecological traits that we observe with what we expected based on our prediction. And that ratio of observed to expected is the CSCI score. Now, that's technically not exactly how the math works, but that's the spirit of the CSCI. The CSCI is scored from a 0 to 1 scale. So a 0 score would mean a highly degraded site, whereas site scores of 1 or even greater than 1 indicate that the site is in reference condition. So if you have a loss of taxonomic completeness or a loss of any of these measures of ecological function, you're likely to have a lowered CSCI score. The CSCI does respond to human activity. So sites that we characterize as high activity, so if there's a lot of urbanization or agriculture or road density or all of the above in the upstream watershed, you're way more likely to have a lowered CSCI score as compared to your reference pool. We use the distribution of scores at reference sites to establish condition categories for all sites. The CSCI was calibrated so that the mean score at reference sites is 1. Scores above the 30th percentile of the reference distribution are considered to represent good biological condition. Scores between the 10th and 30th percentiles represent fair biological condition. Scores between the 1st and 10th percentiles represent poor biological condition. And then scores beneath the 1st percentile of the reference distribution represent very poor biological condition. The third element of measuring and assessing biological integrity is the Perennial Streams Assessment, or PSA. The PSA is a statewide survey where sampling sites are selected according to a probability or random survey design. Each random site represents a known portion of total stream length in the state, so each site has a statistical weight. Probability surveys permit assessment of the entire resource of interest with relatively limited sampling effort, and so in that sense, they work a lot like political or opinion polls. Surveys allow us to provide objective answers to several core questions with known statistical precision. For example, what is the biological condition of California streams? Is condition getting better or worse? How does condition differ among ag streams, urban streams, and forested streams? And finally, what chemical and physical stressors have the strongest association with the biological condition? The latest PSA report, was based on more than 1,300 sites sampled between 2000 and 2012. The green dots in this map and the green pie slices represent streams in good condition, all the way down to the red dots and red pie slices, which represent streams in very poor condition. And on average, statewide, we found that nearly half of the stream length in the state was in good biological condition, but that result varied regionally. So for example, in the Sierra and the North Coast, a little more than half of stream length was in good condition. By contrast, in the Central Coast and South Coast, a little more than half of the stream length was in poor or very poor condition. And of course, the Central Valley is not looking so good. Nearly all the stream length in the Central Valley is in poor or very poor condition. Okay, the bar charts across the bottom, the color coding is the same as in the previous graph. The y-axis is percentage of stream length. We found that streams in ag or urban dominated watersheds were mostly in poor condition. Streams in forested watersheds were mostly in good condition, and streams with mixed land use and or land cover were more variable in condition. Finally, we were able to calculate relative risk, which is the increased risk of biological impairment when stressors exceed some critical threshold. Relative risk is a concept that's used a lot in human health and epidemiology. So when you hear that smokers are 10 times more likely to develop lung cancer than non-smokers, that's relative risk. I haven't defined here what values constitute exceedance of those critical thresholds for stressors. It's a little cumbersome to present concisely, partially because those thresholds vary regionally. So you're just going to have to trust me on that. But just as an example of what we found, when total phosphorus, so PTL, that tallest bar in the middle, when that critical value for phosphorus is exceeded, we have nearly a threefold risk of associated impairment in biological condition. When the threshold for our riparian disturbance index is exceeded, the so-called W1 Hall, you have over a 2.5-fold increase of associated biological impairment. Okay, so I was going to close with some final points just to give you guys an idea of the scope and breadth of the program beyond these key elements, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this.